Welcome. Tonight we wander together into a world of ink-stained parchment, timbered cottages, and the low hum of Elizabethan life. You find yourself standing on a narrow street in Stratford-upon-Avon where the air smells faintly of wood smoke and tannery vats, where merchants call from stalls, and horses clop steadily on uneven stones. This is where William Shakespeare first draws breath in 1564. In a house of exposed beams and plaster, a house that still leans slightly as though it remembers centuries of footsteps. You'd probably not last a week in this town, with its rough woolen clothes, chilly hearths, and the constant smell of livestock drifting through windows. But for him, it is simply home. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you feel like it, post your location and the local time in the comments. I always love seeing where and when people are listening from. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You step into the timbered home of John and Mary Shakespeare, where William is the third child of a growing family. His father, a glove maker by trade, works with animal hides that give off a sharp, lingering odor, though they also keep food on the table. His mother, from the Arden family, carries with her the rural strength of farmers and forest landowners. The rhythms of family life are practical, mending, bartering, cooking, and praying, all under the weight of strict community expectations. Stratford is no London. It is a market town, modest but busy, where you hear gossip at every corner about grain prices, civic duties, and parish disputes. A well-known fact slips quietly into your awareness. In April 1564, as William is only days old, plague strikes Stratford, carrying off hundreds. The infant is baptized quickly at Holy Trinity Church, as all children were, but especially now with death so near. You walk down the stone aisle of that church, its wooden pews polished by centuries of use, and you feel the fragile line between survival and loss. Scholars still argue whether the plague shaped his family's cautious, sometimes anxious view of fortune, but the shadow of mortality hangs nearby from the very start. His father rises socially for a while, gaining civic offices such as bailiff, an early sign that the Shakespeares are climbing upward. But fortune turns, as it often does in these times, and debts, lawsuits, and accusations of illegal wool trading drag him down. You picture William, a small boy, overhearing whispered conversations at the hearth about fines and creditors. The tension of losing respect in a small town where everyone knows everyone. It is an early lesson in instability. One that echoes later in the precarious lives of kings and courtiers he sketches in his plays. Yet childhood is not all shadows. You wander with him across fields where daisies and buttercups sway, and along the banks of the Avon where the river runs smooth and bright. The market days are noisy, but for a boy they are an endless parade of sights, jugglers, foreign traders, perhaps a traveling bear-baiter with his poor chained beast. You feel the mix of wonder and unease such spectacles stir in him, sensations that will later find their way into scenes of carnival and cruelty. A quirky tidbit survives in local lore. John Shakespeare was fined for not keeping his front yard tidy, letting muck pile up against the wall. You imagine young William darting past a mess, embarrassed, or perhaps laughing, knowing that even a father with civic honors could be scolded like any neighbor. Small moments like these stitch together the fabric of ordinary life, grounding the boy who would one day invent worlds of kings and spirits. You pause in the simple grammar school where he likely sits for hours each day, though we will walk deeper into that in time. For now he is still a boy in Stratford, hearing his parents' fortunes rise and fall, his siblings sometimes sick, sometimes noisy, sometimes buried too soon in the churchyard. The timber-bird town hums around him, preparing him quietly for the larger stages ahead. The smells and sounds linger, rushes strewn on floors, bells from the church tower marking the hours, the bray of donkeys on market day. You stand in the middle of Henley Street, the family home rising beside you, and you know you are at the beginning of a long, winding road. It is a place of wood smoke and river breezes, of ambition and anxiety, and though he cannot see it yet, every sound and sight here is a thread he will later weave into the tapestry of his plays. The cradle rocks near the hearth, the river flows outside, and the air of Stratford holds both plague and promise. You stay a moment longer in the stillness of that house, feeling the weight of beginnings, knowing that even in this small town, history has already begun to turn its quiet wheel. You move forward a few quiet years, stepping into the timber-framed grammar school where William spends his boyhood mornings. The air inside is cool, smelling of chalk dust and old wood. You sit at one of the long benches, worn smooth by restless hands, and hear the scratch of quills across rough paper. The schoolmasters speak Latin as often as English, drilling their pupils in classical texts, the stern rhythm of Virgil and Ovid echoing in sing-song recitations. For you, the lessons might feel endless, but for William they are seeds, lines of verse, heroic tales, and moral parables that will later sprout in his plays. It is a well-known fact that this school offered a surprisingly rigorous education for the sons of townsmen like John Shakespeare. You imagine young William puzzling over grammar exercises, then slipping away at dusk to the riverbank, repeating phrases under his breath, tasting their rhythm. Historians still argue whether he received formal higher education later, but the likely truth is that he never went to university, unlike rivals such as Marlowe. Yet this foundation, heavy with Latin authors and rhetorical drills, gives him enough fuel for a lifetime of writing. But not all of his youth is lived in classrooms. You walk with him through Stratford's bustling fairs, where traders from across England gather, where you might hear a snatch of a ballad, smell roasted meats, or see a wandering troupe of players setting up makeshift boards. The boy's eyes widen at these performers. You can almost hear the laughter of villagers pressed shoulder to shoulder, delighting in comic turns or gasping at dramatic speeches. Even before he is old enough to join them, he is already memorizing gestures, lines, and rhythms. Then the story fades, as history does, into what people call the lost years. After his teenage schooling, the record grows quiet, like pages torn from a book. You walk through this silence, wondering where he might be. Some say he worked with his father in the glove trade, slicing hides and stitching leather. Others imagine him a schoolteacher in a distant town, patiently drilling pupils in the very Latin he once recited. There are stories, too, of him fleeing Stratford after a scrape with the lop-poaching deer on the estate of Sir Thomas Lucy. The tale may be apocryphal, but you can picture him darting into the woods, heart racing, hiding in shadows as angry huntsmen shout behind him. A quirky tidbit ties into this legend. Villagers later claimed that Sir Thomas Lucy was mocked in Shakespeare's early plays, particularly in the fussy character of Justice Shallow. Was this youthful revenge, or just playful coincidence? No one can say for certain. Still, you smile, imagining the young man turning local scandal into literary jest, as if even embarrassment could become raw material for art. As you drift through those quiet years, you feel both the absence of evidence and the presence of possibility. Historians still argue whether he traveled farther, perhaps to the north, perhaps even across the sea. Some dream of him as a soldier or sailor, soaking in experience. Others believe he stayed close to Stratford, biding his time, a restless young man without a clear future. The truth slips like water through your fingers, and in that uncertainty lies a peculiar comfort. The gaps let you imagine, and in imagining, you find yourself closer to him than any record could allow. Back in Stratford, you picture evenings by the hearth, where neighbors tell stories and songs drift into the rafters. He listens, storing them away. The cadence of a joke, the sharp sting of a quarrel, the ache of a ballad sung by a tired voice. These two are his education. Not just Ovid and Seneca, but the laughter of villagers, the gossip of alehouses, the murmurs of lovers in dark corners. All of it will one day surface, dressed in blank verse, and woven into scenes both comic and tragic. And so, in this uncertain span of years, you watch him standing between boyhood and manhood, between Stratford's boundaries and the wider world. His father's fortunes continued to stumble, pulling the family down the ladder of respectability. He himself has no wealth, no title, no university friends to ease his way into London. Yet even in this fog of uncertainty, you sense the gathering storm of ambition. The boy who recited Virgil, the youth who may have stolen deer or taught Latin in some village school, is becoming restless. His eyes are already fixed, though he does not know it yet, on a stage that will carry his voice far beyond Stratford. The lost years end as suddenly as they begin, leaving you with fragments and speculations, but you step gently out of them, carrying forward the image of a young man, lean with hunger, restless with words, quietly preparing himself for the life to come. You find yourself on a narrow lane outside Stratford, the air crisp with the smell of thatched roofs and damp earth. William is no longer just the restless boy of schooldays. He is now a young man stepping into the obligations of adulthood. At only 18 years old, he marries Anne Hathaway, a woman 8 years his senior, in the late autumn of 1582. You walk toward her family's farmhouse in Shottery, its timber walls and sloping roof resting quietly among orchards. Inside you hear the low crackle of a fire and the muted talk of hurried arrangements. It is a well-known fact that Anne was pregnant at the time of their wedding, and their first daughter, Susanna, was baptized just 6 months later. You imagine the hushed conversations in Stratford, the sideways glances at the timing. Marriage, in this age, is as much contract as romance, a joining of families and fortunes. Still, you sense a tenderness between them, the young man and the older woman, settling into domestic life under the weight of necessity. Historians still argue whether it was a match of affection or pressure, whether Shakespeare found comfort or constraint in Anne's steady presence. The cottage itself, which you wander through now, feels both snug and slightly cramped. Low beams press down, the hearth smokes, and the rooms are filled with the bustle of family. You see William cradle his infant daughter, the flicker of pride mingled with the nervousness of responsibility. Soon, twins, Hamnet and Judith, arrive in 1585, swelling the household's noise and demands. For a time, his life is full of ordinary chores, chopping wood, mending fences, making sure shoes last through muddy winters. And yet, you sense that ambition is still alive within him, restless as ever. Stratford offers stability but little outlet for creativity. You walk with him through fields at dusk, where the twilight hush is broken by the occasional call of a crow. Perhaps in those quiet moments he dreams of something larger, of a life beyond the hedgerows and timbered halls. A quirky tidbit threads into this story. In one legal document, Shakespeare's name appears as William Shakespeare. Spelling is fluid in this age, but you can imagine the young man wincing, or perhaps laughing, at the many shapes his name might take. That playful inconsistency, even in identity, feels fitting for someone who will later bend language into countless forms. But here, in his 20s, the path is still uncertain. The twins' birth is the last firm record for a while, and again the shadows of the lost years close around him. How does a young father with no fortune and 3 children begin to seek a life in theatre? Some believe he stays in Stratford, providing for his family. Others whisper that he drifts to London soon after, pulled by travelling players or desperate for work. Historians still argue whether Anne remained behind in Stratford while he slipped away toward the city. You linger in the cottage, watching Anne's steady routines, her hands worn by work, her face touched with worry yet set with resilience. She manages household matters as William slips further into absence, a rhythm that will last through much of their marriage. He writes about love so often, and you cannot help but wonder if some lines draw from her presence or from her distance. For now, you hold the image of a young man with ink-stained fingers, balancing a wife, 3 children, and a gnawing ambition for something beyond Stratford's limits. The quiet house in Shottery stands behind him, the Avon flows gently nearby, and the road to London stretches ahead, uncertain but irresistible. The hearth glows low, the orchard trees bend in the wind, and though the domestic life holds him in its arms, the stage is already calling. You step with him toward that calling, not knowing yet how fully it will change both his world and ours. You step with him now into the clamor of London, the mud-slick streets lined with taverns, vendors, and half-built scaffolds. The year is likely the early 1590s, and William arrives with little more than ambition. You walk beside him past the wooden stalls selling pies and oysters, hear the raucous laughter spilling out of alehouses, and feel the restless energy of a city bursting with people. Here, theatres rise just beyond the city walls, their banners snapping in the breeze. They are not yet grand in reputation, but to a man from Stratford, they are dazzling. A well-known fact anchors you. By 1592, Shakespeare is already making a name for himself as both actor and playwright, enough so that one rival pamphleteer, Robert Greene, sneers at him as an upstart crow. You picture William reading those words in print, stung by envy disguised as critique, and then quietly smiling. To be mocked by rivals is to be noticed. Historians still argue whether he first entered the theatre as a lowly actor carrying spears or as a writer crafting lines backstage. But either way, he is climbing. The playhouses are rough but alive with energy. You step into one, a timbered theatre open to the sky, its thatched roof circling the stage. The smell of ale and sweat rises. The groundlings jostle for space, and a trumpet calls the crowd to attention. You feel the boards under your feet vibrate as actors stamp and declaim. Perhaps William is among them, his voice blending with the roar, or perhaps he is off to the side, eyes keen, scribbling revisions in the margins. In these early years, his works are expendable comedies like The Two Gentlemen of Verona and histories like Henry VI. You hear the echoes of Stratford still within them, the woods and rivers, the gossip and quarrels, the sense of a small-town boy channeling big-city ambition. Audiences laugh, cheer, and sometimes boo, but they return, eager for more. A quirky tidbit drifts into your awareness. During this time, The theaters are often shut down by outbreaks of plague. Performers scatter, companies disband temporarily, and writers must find other outlets. William, instead of vanishing, turns to poetry, publishing Venus and Adonis in 1593. Dedicated to a noble patron, it becomes a runaway success, whispered about in drawing rooms and copied by hand. You imagine him smiling at the irony, his plays silenced by disease, yet his verse bringing him newfound reputation. The city around you thrums with contradictions. On one street noble coaches roll by, velvet curtains drawn. On another, beggars huddle by the wall, scratching at sores. In the theaters, those worlds mix together, apprentices and lords alike lean forward to catch his lines. Historians still argue how much he acted in his own plays, whether he took only minor parts or carried roles of greater weight, but you can picture him bowing at the end of a performance, feeling both applause and exhaustion. And then there is the camaraderie of players. You hear the murmur of voices backstage, the clatter of swords and costumes, the nervous laughter before stepping into the light. The company of actors becomes his second family, a circle that feeds his creativity. Rivalries sting, yes, but collaborations spark as well. He learns the pace of dialogue, the swell of laughter, the silence that follows a well-turned phrase. You linger in one evening's performance, the torches flickering, the crowd leaning in. William stands aside, his eyes scanning the audience. Some laugh too loudly, some whisper, some sit utterly still, spellbound. In that moment, you realize what drives him, not just ambition or necessity, but the thrill of moving hearts, of weaving words into an experience that binds strangers together. London is dangerous, dirty, and unpredictable, but for Shakespeare, it is also possibility itself. He walks its crooked lanes, listens in on tavern brawls, gathers scraps of gossip and politics, and tucks them away for later. He is still at the beginning, still proving himself, but already, the roar of the city and the rhythm of the stage are shaping him into something greater than Stratford ever could. The boards creak underfoot, the playhouse empties, and the evening air cools against your skin. William lingers a moment, gazing at the river's dark flow. The stage has taken hold of him, and though the years ahead will bring both triumph and rivalry, he is no longer the uncertain youth. He is becoming Shakespeare. You follow him now into the thick of London's theatrical heartbeat, where his name begins to glow more brightly on playbills and whispered conversations. It is the mid-1590s, and William has moved beyond experiments. He is shaping stories that catch fire with audiences. You slip into a theatre on the south bank of the Thames, the crowd buzzing with anticipation for one of his histories. The stage fills with clashing swords and royal speeches, the kind of drama that turns commoners into patriots for an evening. It is a well-known fact that Richard III and the three parts of Henry VI are among his earliest successes, delighting audiences with blood, treachery, and political maneuvering. Londoners crave such tales, perhaps because their own queen is aging, and questions of succession simmer beneath every conversation. You watch him pacing in the shadows, quietly listening as actors deliver his words. Historians still argue whether he intended subtle political commentary or simply knew how to thrill a restless crowd. But either way, his timing is impeccable. Then comes laughter. You step into another performance, this time a comedy. A Midsummer Night's Dream spins across the stage, its enchanted forest alive with mischievous fairies and bumbling craftsmen. The crowd roars with delight as the weaver bottom brays like a donkey, yet they fall silent in wonder when lovers drift through moonlit glades. You feel the gentle balance he strikes, blending slapstick with poetry, silliness with order. It is a rhythm he will refine again and again. A quirky tidbit emerges in A Comedy of Errors. One of his earliest plays, he piles on so many mistaken identities that some scholars believe the audience must have laughed until they cried, struggling to keep track of who was who. Imagine the chaos of groundlings pointing, shouting, and laughing at the unfolding confusions. Even in these early works, he shows a gift for orchestrating both noise and silence. You wander with him through the taverns where actors and poets gather. The air is thick with smoke, the tables sticky with spilled ale. Here, William trades jokes, ideas, and maybe even insults with fellow writers. Rivalries sting, especially with men like Christopher Marlowe, whose bold verse sets a standard to match. Yet friendships grow too, with actors who become his lifelong collaborators. He studies their gestures, their timing, their voices, and writes roles to suit them. Success grows steadier, but so does scrutiny. Pamphlets mock, rivals mutter, and questions about authorship already flicker. Is a glovemaker's son truly capable of such verse? Historians still argue about the depth of his schooling, the reach of his reading, yet each new play, delivered with wit and heart, answers those doubts not with argument but with applause. The city itself feeds him. You walk beside him along the crowded streets, where apprentices shout, merchants haggle, and sailors stumble in from the docks with tales of foreign lands. The chaos of London pours into his imagination, reshaped into characters who joke, quarrel, and dream. From nobles to servants, from lovers to fools, he gives each one a voice. By the close of the decade, his reputation is undeniable. The Queen herself has seen his plays, and the nobility whisper his name with a mix of curiosity and approval. He is no longer merely an upstart crow, he is a playwright with a company, an audience, and a rising star. Yet beneath the applause, you sense the quiet pulse of pressure. Each success breeds expectation. The city demands new plays. The patrons expect wit and wisdom, and rivals wait eagerly for him to stumble. Still, he writes, steadily, restlessly, with a rhythm that carries him deeper into the world of theater. You leave him tonight in the glow of triumph, standing backstage as the crowd erupts in laughter and cheers. The wooden boards, the torchlight, the roar of voices, all of it affirms what he already knows in his heart. He has found his place, and the stage will never let him go. You step with him now into the heart of his career, where the name Shakespeare is tied not only to plays but to a theatre itself. The Globe rises in 1599, its half-timbered frame circling sky and stage. A bold new venture part-owned by William and his fellow actors. You cross the Thames to Southwark, where bear-baiting pits, bawdy taverns, and crowds of apprentices line the muddy streets. There, beyond the noise and stench, stands the Globe, its whitewashed walls gleaming like a beacon of possibility. It is a well-known fact that Shakespeare invested directly in this playhouse, becoming a shareholder, rare for a writer of his time. You wander inside as carpenters hammer, smell the resin of fresh timber, and hear actors rehearsing lines. The stage is open to the sky, the pit ready for groundlings who pay a penny to stand, the galleries waiting for wealthier patrons. This is not merely a venue, it is a crucible, a space that will shape the greatest works of his career. Historians still argue whether he had a hand in the building's design, but you imagine him strolling through, suggesting how the stage might thrust further into the audience, how acoustics might catch a whisper or roar. The Queen's presence still hovers, though by now Elizabeth is aging. You sit quietly at court, where plays are performed for her and her courtiers, candlelight glimmering across gilded halls. When she laughs, others laugh. When she nods, others lean forward. It is said she particularly enjoyed The Merry Wives of Windsor, a play spun from her own request to see Falstaff in love. Whether true or not, you picture William crafting lines to please her, weaving comedy into the refined atmosphere of the palace. But London's theatres are not just for royalty, they are for everyone. You stand in the pit one afternoon, shoulder to shoulder with apprentices, sailors, and beggars. The air smells of onions and ale when the actors roar onto the stage. The crowd roars back, hissing villains and cheering heroes. The energy is raw, electric, sometimes unruly. You glance up to the galleries where nobles sit, their silks rustling as they lean over the rail. The Globe is a rare meeting ground, where rich and poor alike share in the same stories. A quirky tidbit from this era makes you smile at one performance. A cannon shot for sound effects during Henry VIII's set The Thatched Roof ablaze, burning the Globe to the ground in 1613. No one died, though a man's breeches caught fire, quickly doused with ale. You picture the chaos, the crowd rushing out, the actors scattering. Yet even in disaster, the Globe was rebuilt, its spirit too strong to vanish. In these years, William writes with confidence. Julius Caesar storms across the stage, filled with political intrigue and haunting speeches. Twelfth Night sparkles with wit and mistaken identities, its songs lingering long after the curtain falls. You watch him refine his art, balancing comedy with tragedy, poetry with sharp realism. Historians still argue whether audiences of the time grasped all the layers we now praise, or whether they simply enjoyed the laughter and the spectacle, perhaps both. And then there is royal attention. With Elizabeth's death in 1603, James I ascends the throne, and Shakespeare's company becomes the King's Men. You imagine the swell of pride, no longer mere actors and writers, but royal servants, commissioned to perform before the monarch himself. James favors darker, weightier themes, witchcraft, politics, ambition, and William obliges with plays like Macbeth and King Lear. You walk beside him through candlelit halls where King James sits, somber and sharped, while courtiers murmur approval. The stakes are higher now, royal favor, patronage, and prestige. Each performance is both art and diplomacy. Back at the Globe, though the rhythm continues, crowds pressing in, coins clinking at the gate, actors rehearsing in shabby clothes before stepping into king's robes, William moves between worlds, the bawdy laughter of tavern pits, the hushed grandeur of royal chambers. His plays must please both, and somehow, they do. You linger in the Globe at dusk, when the crowd is gone and the stage is empty. William stands there, gazing at the wooden beams, hearing in his mind the echoes of speeches yet to be written. The theatre is his canvas, his chapel, his marketplace. It is the vessel through which he turns life itself into story. The boards creak beneath your feet, the river murmurs outside, and you sense that Shakespeare is no longer simply a playwright. He is now the heartbeat of a theatre, the voice of a company, the presence of an age. You feel the air grow heavier now, as though the seasons themselves turn darker in step with William's pen. The comedies that once bubbled with music and mischief give way to tragedies where ghosts walk, daggers gleam, and storms rage. You sit in the dim of the Globe, candlelight trembling against the rafters, as a hush falls over the crowd. This is no longer playful laughter, it is the silence of an audience gripped by fate. It is a well-known fact that around the turn of the century, Shakespeare writes Hamlet, Othello, King Lear, and Macbeth in close succession. Each play plunges into questions of power, betrayal, madness, and death. You lean forward as Hamlet paces the stage, whispering to be or not to be, his words carrying across the pit with aching clarity. The crowd leans with you, apprentices and nobles alike caught in the same net of doubt. Historians still argue whether Shakespeare's own grief, perhaps over the death of his son Hamnet in 1596, fed the sorrow that runs through these plays. Whatever the cause, the tragedies strike with a depth that feels almost unbearable. You follow him backstage, where actors wipe sweat from their brows and mutter about heavy roles. Playing Lear leaves a man exhausted, broken by cries of howl, 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 yet they return to it night after night, for the words cut deeper than any sword. William watches, quiet, his eyes shadowed. He is not just crafting stories now, he is pouring out the weight of experience, loss, and reflection. A quirky tidbit adds texture to the gloom. During one early performance of Hamlet, a stage direction calls for Ophelia to enter with her hair down, singing. In Elizabethan England, loose hair signaled madness or scandal, so the sight of an actress walking disheveled across the stage must have shocked audiences profoundly. Imagine the murmurs, the uncomfortable shuffling, the thrill of seeing boundaries pushed in real time. Beyond the stage, England itself feels unsettled. Queen Elizabeth is gone, James sits on the throne, and whispers of conspiracy linger after the gunpowder plot of 1605. You walk through the smoky streets with William, sensing tension in the air, rumors of plots, fears of spies. The tragedies seem to mirror these anxieties. Kings undone, loyalties shattered, nations trembling. Historians still argue whether Shakespeare meant deliberate political commentary or simply reflected the unease he breathed in daily. Either way, his audiences recognize themselves in the mirror he raised. In Macbeth, you hear the clang of ambition, the lure of prophecy, the stench of blood that cannot be washed away. Torches flicker as witches chant, and the crowd leans in, half thrilled, half afraid. King James, fascinated by witchcraft, surely found the play both entertaining and unsettling. You picture William balancing carefully, giving the monarch his fascination while still weaving a story that resonates far beyond courtly tastes. The storm rages on stage, thunder rolled by drums, rain suggested by actors shaking sheets of metal. Yet the storm inside Lear is fiercer. You stand in the pit, soaked in metaphorical rain, and feel the despair ripple outward. Some in the audience wipe tears, others shift uneasily. This is not easy entertainment. It is a plunge into the heart of suffering. You catch William later, walking home along the Thames, his cloak pulled tight. He seems older now, worn not only by age but by the gravity of what he has conjured. To carry such stories must take a toll, even on the writer who gives them life. He has moved beyond pleasing crowds or patrons. He is writing for something larger, something that even he may not fully understand. Still, light flickers at the edges. Even in these tragedies, moments of humor, of tenderness, break through. The gravedigger's jokes in Hamlet, the fool's wisdom in *Lear, the porter's drunken ramble in Macbeth, all remind you that despair and laughter share the same stage. Shakespeare knows, as life itself knows, that sorrow and joy always walk together. The globe creaks in the night wind, The river swirls darkly, and you sense the weight of this tragic period pressing on him. Yet in that weight lies brilliance, a body of work that will echo through centuries. You stand quietly, the applause fading, and realize that William has written himself into eternity, one aching line at a time. You step into candlelit chambers, the scent of tallow and parchment mingling in the warm air, and find William surrounded by a different kind of world, one of patrons, sonnets, and intimate friendships. The stage and the globe remain his domain, but here in these quiet rooms, he navigates alliances, admirations, and subtle courtly politics. Noblemen lean forward with interest, commissioning poems or inviting him to private performances. It is a world of hushed applause, the kind that travels in whispers rather than roars. It is a well-known fact that during this period he writes and dedicates a collection of sonnets to a mysterious patron, often called the fair youth. The poems are intimate, filled with longing, admiration, and at times, regret. You linger over the verses with him, sensing both affection and tension. Historians still argue over the identity of the fair youth, whether a single individual, a composite, or even a literary device. The mystery adds a layer of quiet fascination, a puzzle as delicate as the rhymes themselves. You follow him through the winding streets to homes where private readings take place. Candlelight dances across walls hung with tapestries, the hush of attentive ears pressing close. There, Shakespeare's words are absorbed differently, spoken slowly, allowing listeners to savor every turn of phrase. You feel the intimacy of the moment, the gentle thrill of creating connection through poetry, as opposed to the raw spectacle of the stage. A quirky tidbit emerges. One sonnet famously includes a pun that plays on the patron's name, nearly invisible to modern readers. You smile, imagining the sly satisfaction he must have felt, dropping a private joke into verse, a secret shared only with the few who could understand. The sonnets are a playground for wit as well as emotion, and you sense that even in the privacy of these chambers, he delights in audience and artistry alike. Yet his friendships are not purely literary. You see him moving among courtiers and other playwrights, sharing ideas, offering guidance, or quietly observing. Some relationships are warm, others competitive. You catch glimpses of Christopher Marlowe's shadow in conversation, of younger poets nervously reading their lines before him. Historians still argue how much influence these relationships had on his work, but the subtle interplay of camaraderie and rivalry seems to fuel his creativity in ways that solitary study never could. Patrons provide more than flattery, they provide security. With their favor, he can experiment boldly, explore darker themes, or innovate on stage without immediate fear of financial collapse. The balance is delicate. A word too sharp or a jest to public might offend. Yet constraint often sharpens art. You feel the careful precision required, the negotiation between expression and prudence, and realize that this environment hones not only skill but wisdom. Evenings drift into quiet, and you find him in a small study, quill in hand, candlelight flickering across the parchment. He writes sonnets side by side with plays, testing rhythm, sound, and meaning. The city outside may roar or whisper, but here, words take their own shape. You notice the careful attention to line breaks, the subtle play of imagery, the layering of feeling that makes each sonnet a small, concentrated world. You leave him at his desk, the night settling over London like a soft velvet curtain. In these chambers, in the company of patrons and muses, Shakespeare stretches both heart and intellect. He is still the man of the stage, but also a poet in quieter spaces, shaping language with precision and care, threading intimacy through every carefully chosen word. The sonnets, like the plays, are a legacy in motion, speaking to readers who may never meet him, yet feel the gentle touch of his presence. You walk with him now along the familiar streets of Stratford, the air carrying the scent of timber, river, and fields returning from harvest. Years have passed since his first plays stirred London audiences. He has accumulated wealth, reputation, and experience, and now he returns to his hometown intermittently, drawn by family and a quieter pace. You wander beside him through gardens, past orchards, and across cobbled lanes, sensing a man who has lived between two worlds, the roaring city and the soft hum of the countryside. It is a well-known fact that Shakespeare bought New Place, one of the largest houses in Stratford, in 1597. You step through the front door, feel the polished wood underfoot, and notice the formal gardens outside, where he might stroll and reflect. Scholars still argue about how much time he spent here versus London, but it is clear that this house becomes a center of stability and pride. He invests in land, builds connections with local gentry, and observes civic life, balancing the bustle of fame with the rhythm of home. You notice the small domestic routines he enjoys, walking through fields with Anne, tending to minor renovations, and perhaps teasing the twins, now teenagers, about school or manners. The quieter days are punctuated by visitors, friends, and occasionally London actors who come to Stratford for respite or rehearsal. You sense a man who has traded some of the urgent thrill of performance for the satisfaction of roots, yet whose mind remains always in motion. A quirky tidbit surfaces. He once purchased a share in a local tithing meadow, an investment so mundane it feels almost comical against the backdrop of his plays. You imagine him discussing acreage and pasture with neighbors, a playwright suddenly concerned with grass and fences. Life in Stratford grounds him, giving contrast to the lofty tragedies and comedies he has created, reminding him, and you, that even the greatest mind returns to simple concerns. Yet he is not idle. You feel him jotting lines in the quiet of his study, refining poetry, or revisiting drafts of plays for publication or performance. Even here, far from the roar of the globe, he experiments with language, crafting dialogues and images that will endure. Historians still argue how much of his later plays, like Cymbeline or The Tempest, were influenced by this return to rural life. Perhaps it is the peace of the countryside, perhaps the reflection on aging, or perhaps both. You see him strolling near the Avon, reflecting silently. The river moves steadily, carrying memories of boyhood, losses, and triumphs. The local townspeople greet him respectfully, aware of the fame he carries, but also familiar with the man behind it. You sense a subtle tension between the celebrity and the neighbor, the playwright and the father. Balancing the worlds of public acclaim and private life requires skill, and he does so with careful patience. In these years, family remains central. He watches the children grow, manages property, and maintains ties with friends and patrons. Yet his work never truly ceases. The spark that lit London stages still flickers in his mind. You sense him dreaming quietly of new plots, new characters, new worlds, even as he enjoys the slower rhythms of Stratford life. Evenings fall soft and golden, the river glinting in the setting sun. William pauses, looking back toward the town, and then forward toward the larger horizon of his imagination. Here, in this balance between retreat and creativity, he finds perspective, shaping his legacy as both man and artist. You walk now alongside him through the final stretch of life, the streets of Stratford quieter, the river reflecting softer light in the afternoons. William Shakespeare grows older, his hair graying, his gait slower, but his mind remains alive with words, rhythms, and images. You notice how he pauses longer at familiar corners, how he smiles at simple village scenes, yet in his eyes lingers the depth of years spent capturing the complexities of human nature on stage and page. It is a well-known fact that Shakespeare dies in 1616, at the age of 52, and is buried in the chancel of Holy Trinity Church. You enter the church silently, the smell of aged stone and candle wax filling your senses. His grave is simple, marked with a modest inscription, but scholars still argue whether he requested a curse upon anyone who dares move his bones, a warning that combines humor, superstition, and seriousness. You feel the weight of a life both ordinary and extraordinary resting in that quiet space. Even in these final days, he is engaged with his works. You imagine him reviewing sonnets, musing over the plays, perhaps offering notes to actors or friends who have traveled from London. His legacy is in motion, though he cannot yet know the full reach it will have. A quirky tidbit surfaces. He left a surprisingly specific bequest of 26 shillings and 8 pence for a mattress in his will, a small and human detail that reminds you he remains a man grounded in domestic concerns even amidst towering fame. You see him in reflective moments, sitting by the window of New Place, gazing at the Avon flowing gently past, children groan, the town humming with ordinary life. Memories of stage lights, applause, and whispered critiques mingle with the scent of orchards and the rustle of leaves. He has witnessed triumph, scandal, laughter, grief, and love, and he has transformed all of it into art. Historians still argue about the full extent of his authorship in some later works, but the truth of his genius is unmistakable in the enduring power of his words. You feel the echo of his presence everywhere, in the half-timbered homes, in the clatter of market days, in the shadows of the globe long gone. London audiences may have cheered, kings may have leaned forward in awe, and courtiers may have whispered admiration, but here in Stratford, he is simply William, a son, husband, father, a neighbor who carried stories from the hearth to the stage and back again. Even in the final illness, he maintains a quiet dignity, attending to family, managing property, and perhaps reflecting on the strange alchemy of words, life, and legacy. You imagine him murmuring lines of verse under his breath, rehearsing rhythms that will outlive him, content that the stage and page hold the life he gave them. And then, as the sun sets behind the distant hills, the river glows softly, the churchyard rests in silence, and you sense that Shakespeare's life has come full circle. The boy who ran through fields, the young man who fled Stratford for the theatre, the playwright who dazzled London, the poet who charmed noblemen, and the elder who returned home, all of him merges into one continuous presence, leaving the world both enriched and enchanted. You sink now into the gentle wind-down, the final calm after centuries of stories, applause, and whispered sonnets. The streets of Stratford grow quiet, the Avon murmurs slowly, carrying reflections of a life lived fully, brilliantly, and with ceaseless curiosity. You imagine William Shakespeare walking along its banks, feeling the soft breeze on his face, recalling the laughter of children, the roar of audiences, the tension of political intrigue, and the quiet intimacy of candlelit chambers where verse was shaped and cherished. Even as his body rests, the energy of his work lingers, a soft echo in every page, every stage, every whispered line. The comedies still sparkle with wit, the tragedies still pulse with profound understanding of the human heart. The histories resonate with power, and the sonnets hum with the intimate music of love, longing, and reflection. You feel that presence as a warmth beside you, a gentle companion whose voice continues to speak across centuries. You linger on the smallest details, the rustle of pages, the sway of a candle flame, the distant crow of a morning rooster. These ordinary sounds connect you to his extraordinary life, reminding you that even genius walks among the everyday. You sense the man in his garden, listening to birds, touching the wood of his home, smiling quietly at the world that both challenged and inspired him. Time softens around you. The city and countryside fade into twilight hues, the river flows endlessly, and the distant echo of actors' laughter and applause becomes a lullaby. The legacy of Shakespeare is not just in books or performances, but in the way his words linger in minds and hearts, shaping the world subtly and profoundly. Now, take a deep breath, allow your shoulders to relax, and let the rhythm of his life and work guide your thoughts gently toward rest. The brilliance, the laughter, the grief, and the love, all of it has passed into memory and imagination, leaving behind a quiet, enduring glow. Sleep softly, carrying the hum of history and poetry with you, letting the river of Stratford and the echoes of a playwright's genius lull your mind into calm. Let your thoughts drift as lightly as paper on water, resting in the knowledge that one life, lived fully and with endless curiosity, can continue to touch hearts long after the last line is spoken.